Hi, I'm Shruthi Vemula, and this is Aishwarya Thiyagarajan, and we're both juniors from Washington High School. We're a policy team that are campaigning for the expansion of youth voting. In this campaign, we assume the judges to be politicians that are willing to invest in campaigns. Throughout this whole campaign, we're hoping to fulfill the NGN goals of engaging and empowering youth in community development, ending corruption in societies, and preparing the youth for preparing the next generation for future work. Um, in this campaign, we strive to address the lack of youth voters in our elections. We discovered that there's three main reasons why the youth isn't involved in our elections. First, the young voters lack knowledge on the complicated process of actually registering to vote and politics in general. Second, they feel disengaged because they believe that their role doesn't really matter or their vote doesn't really matter to old age candidates. Third, they lack interest as political campaigns and changes aren't really directed towards college students, and the absence of youth voters is only increasing. In 2020, the youth turnout in the Democratic primary only ranged from 5% to 19% for all of 18 to 29-year-olds. To make a change and to make a difference, we come up with a 3E reform plan. Educate as in increasing knowledge, expand as in spreading the word, and engage as in making youth voters more interested.
Now, to be more specific, we had this 5-step initiative to have solutions towards democracy. So one of our main problems is that a lot of students aren't interested, which is what Shruthi brought up. So in our campaign, we try to interest other young voters. So for example, we had fun games about political candidates, and we also emphasize long-term gratification, which means that we are looking towards long-term goals in order to achieve a better future for ourselves. Second, our solution was educating the voters. A lot of voters, especially right now, don't know the policies behind different political candidates or behind different propositions or laws or legislations. So in our campaign, we've tried to address different policies and try to educate youth voters. So for example, we try to address the Proposition 13 reform, which I'll go later in depth. When we actually reveal our campaign results. And we've also tried to host fun activities so that we could teach others about our local politicians or different Democratic parties or Republican parties, etc. So our third solution is to also engage the youth voters. So what does that mean? I want to make them feel included in our campaign and feel included in the policy process. So for example, when enacting a legislation, we should make youth voters feel included. A lot of the youth voters right now don't feel included because they feel like adults take a predominant role in the process. But we should also show them that they can make a tangible impact on their community. So for the reason, why are we doing this? What is our problem? What is our problem with youth voting? We believe that youth voting is the fundamental problem to the detrimental issues that we have today. For example, gun control, healthcare, climate change, etc. We believe that voting can really make a difference in these policies. And our fifth solution is try to expand our campaign. So what does that mean? Right now, California is trying to enact an amendment to lower the voting age to 16, which is essentially right because right now in the Constitution, we claim that we want to have taxation with representation, but it's the complete opposite. Right now, 16-year-olds have jobs and they're still being taxed, but they are not given a vote, which is completely unfair and completely unconstitutional.
The goal of our campaign is to increase youth voting first locally, then statewide, and then nationally. By investing in our campaign, we will increase the youth voice in major issues that impact our generation, such as climate change, student loan debt, gun control, and healthcare. These problems are only getting worse as the years go by. For example, in 2018, the student loan debt was more than $1.5 trillion and is set to only increase. We need youth voters to take part in issues that will only impact them and impact us so that we can reform to better fit the future generations that come forward.
So one of our first campaign was actually hosting marches throughout the Bay Area. So for example, we had marches all over San Francisco, Oakland, San Jose, and Berkeley, and we had at least 100 attendees in each march. Obviously, we couldn't do this ourselves because we are only 2 people, so we collaborated with a lot of different organizations. I did blur some of these pictures just for privacy reasons because I don't know if they were comfortable being broadcasted, so just for privacy reasons and just out of respect, I did blur these images. But one of the organizations we did collaborate with was GenUp, which is a nonprofit organization that helps to reallocate money towards our education system. And another organization which I'm personally a part of and taking leadership of is Surfboard E, which is a student advisory committee for the Board of Education. So with these organizations, we did host marches, and we did collaborate with a national organization, which was the Schools and Communities First, which is essentially advocating for the Proposition 13 reform. Now, like I said before, I will go into depth about this. Basically, Proposition 13 reform takes money out of large corporations by reassessing their taxes and putting that money into our education system. Right now, only 10% of the property taxes are being reassessed every year in California, and that is detrimental for our education system. We need to reassess those property values, which a lot of them are large corporations, and we need to take advantage of them in order to better our education system. Now, the fourth picture, again, out of privacy, I blurred it, is actually a bunch of student leaders together at a board meeting in Fremont FESD, and FESD Fremont Unified School District. And basically, we were trying to advocate to the board by endorsing our marches. We're trying to persuade the board to give us more manpower in our initiative and try to help us endorse these marches throughout the Bay Area, which they eventually did. And the fourth is just a flyer for the Proposition 13 reform, just for more evidence. Our second campaign is to have voter registrations at each school. So I live in Fremont, me and Shruthi live in Fremont, and we had voter registrations at least at 5 different high schools, which was Irvington, Mission San Jose, Kennedy, American, Washington. Essentially, we've had a record-breaking of over 2,500 registered voters throughout our city, which was mind-blowing because I know the organization we did collaborate with, which was the Youth Voter Movement, had never seen this many number of registered voters. Essentially, what we did is that we contacted each school administration and we asked them if they could set aside one period so that we could invite different students who are 17 or 18 and basically pre-registered them to vote through affidavits. Next, right after that, we knew that the primary elections were coming up, which was on March 3rd, and we decided to have a voter rally right before then. Essentially, the voter rally had over 100 attendees, including the Fremont Board of Education and the Fremont Mayor, Lily May. Again, I did blur these images just for privacy reasons. So our first part in our voter rally is to just have a mini party, basically a mini brief session about discussing about different political candidates such as Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Andrew Yang, etc. And we also talked about local politicians and local policies such as propositions and the Prop 13 reform again. And then our second part is to have a march, which is around Alameda County Library, which is leading through Fremont. Essentially, these students created their own created posters, and they could put their own slogan on it, and they marched with it throughout central Fremont. Our third part of our voter rally is to actually have a networking event where essentially students can be networked with different local politicians and are even offered internships or volunteer opportunities to help with their political campaign. Again, engaging the youth voters into these political matters. And these are just more receipts of like what we did in our campaign.
For financing our campaign, we asked for an investment of $50,000 to enact a 5-year plan to increase youth voting in the primary and national elections. This plan first includes researching by conducting surveys in states and cities to learn why the youth can't vote or doesn't vote. And then we will educate students on college campuses about candidates and election processes. And then to expand our campaign even further, we will then advocate to lower the voting age first in California and then nationwide.
So here are just a few of the specifics in our campaign costs, just to be more specific about it. So first, we would have production costs, meaning like how we set up the venue, essentially like equipment, supplies. And then second is labor. We need like some managers, like campaign managers or even volunteers to help us with our campaign. And then third is venues. And this is basically a majority of our costs because venues are extremely expensive, especially in large areas such as San Francisco, Fremont, Oakland, etc. And then fifth is just additional fees, any additional little fees that we have to pay, for example, with the venues like taxes, yeah. And our fifth part is supplies. For example, we need equipment for different flyers or different posters that we distribute throughout the city. And our sixth is licenses. So actually, when we hosted the marches for education throughout the Bay Area, for example, in San Francisco, Oakland, etc., we did need city licenses to host those marches, and licenses are pretty expensive. Licenses are pretty expensive, so we did need to dedicate a majority of our budget towards that. And then fifth is just publication, so just pubbing out our campaign, for example, social media, website, etc.
So this is our target analysis. In this, we explain like how we would be expanding our campaign throughout. And first, we will reach out to 18 and 29-year-olds. And then because obviously we're trying to reach the youth voters directly. In the second stage, we will expand to social media because a lot of the youth is actually on social media. So it's an easy way to reach them. And in the third stage, we will contact local school administrations and colleges to host mandatory seminars on voting and how youth voters can register. And in the fourth stage, we will contact local politicians like Lily May to advocate for our campaigns. And in the fifth stage, we will host seminars with well-known figures such as Governor Newsom and other political figures so that they could also advocate for youth voting. As you can see, we've reached the fourth stage by contacting local politicians, hosting seminars at schools and possibly colleges in the future, and reaching social media and reaching 18 to 29-year-olds directly.
So summary, essentially, what did we achieve from this campaign? So first, we try to contact the problem, which was the lack of youth voting. Obviously, you can see from the campaign. Second is, how do we approach this, right? How do we set up our plan? So first, we would want to do it local-wide, which we have already done, and we have already reached a lot of successes with it. And then statewide, for example, the California amendment, trying to pass that amendment to lower the voting age to 16, especially for primary elections. And then nationally, hopefully we can amend our constitution so that we can keep it constitutional, essentially avoiding the fact of taxation without representation, which is what US is obviously not found upon. Now, third is our results. What do we learn from our campaign? So first, we found out that we've helped engage a lot of the teens into the voting process, right? At first, they didn't even know what an affidavit was. And with our campaign, we've taught them how to vote, how to register to vote, and we've also taught them about local politicians and different policies and which policies they favor the most. Now, in conclusion, what did we learn from this, right? We learned that even though we did make improvements within the local area, there still needs to be more progress to be made, especially nationally and statewide, right? Because although we've contacted thousands of teens within our Bay Area, we still need to contact the millions of teens throughout the US and millions of teens who are uneducated about this process and uneducated about the political matters in the future. So how are we still doing our campaign and what are we still doing? So like I said, we've collaborated with GenUp, and GenUp is actually trying to have a student board member at each county in California, essentially engaging more youth members into our political processes. And being the Fremont president of GenUp, this is really important to me because having a student board member at each board of education within every county, especially from being from Surf Board E and having a student board member at Fremont, I really see the political change that can happen if the youth are more engaged in this political process. So thank you. Do you have any questions?
Thank you, ladies. This was a great presentation and great way to, I think, engage the youth in this manner. The question I think I have is really along between each of the events, between board meetings, between all of that. How are you keeping everybody engaged? The continuity of engagement interests me, so I want to know how you're specifically thinking about that with respect to youth.
Well, the thing is that, I've attended almost every single meeting or almost every single activity, and I see like the same amount of people showing up because we offer a lot of volunteer opportunities, and essentially volunteer opportunities, even though they have one side where they gain volunteer hours, they still know the political processes, and it's also a very fun event too. We try to make it as much fun as possible. So for example, with our youth voter rally, we kind of had a mini party where we served snacks, we talked to different local politicians, we even had jokes, and we even had like paper out so that people can like write notes about what they learned. So we try to engage our youth members as much as possible, and we've seen that it was pretty successful because we see like the same people who are volunteering over and over again because they find that it's very fun to engage in politics. I mean, for me personally, I love engaging in politics and fighting with my friend about like this local politician because it's fun for me to be more engaged and be more educated about these matters. And I feel that other students feel the same.
Have you thought about ways to appeal to a broader range of youth voters? I mean, clearly youth voters are going to skew more liberal, but is there a way to decouple the advocacy for youth voting from classic liberal causes?
Sorry, I couldn't hear the last part. Would you just reiterate that again?
So the question is, how do you decouple the advocacy for youth voting from like more specific politics, right? Because younger people are going to be more liberal, and is there a way to reach out so you don't get associated with being a liberal advocacy, but more advocacy for youth voting?
The thing is that at least like within these marches and within our campaign, we try to be as less biased as possible. But of course it's hard, especially living in California when you're living in such a liberal state. So we did try to propose like opposing views. So for example, Republican views and like what are these goals and what are these initiatives. And we essentially leave it up to the students to make their decision. But in terms of a broader aspect, how do we reach a broader range? Is that was your first part of your question, right?
That's right.
Was that the first part of your question? How do you expand to a broader?
Yeah, that's right. Like, so for example, you brought up Prop 13 as an issue that so that's a pretty specific, political case, right? And so are you concerned about getting kind of associated with specific micro political cases when you're advocating for a broader thesis?
Although, yeah, I know I was emphasizing on Proposition 13, but we did advocate for other cases too. For example, schools and communities first, they're not just about Proposition 13. They're just more in general about giving more funding towards our education system, and so is Gen Up. So, for example, we try to have a student board member at each county to associate with different policies within their community. And we've also addressed different policies, at least within our marches and our voter rallies. And essentially, leading on to our campaign, we will try to do that as much as possible. I know I emphasize more on Proposition 13 reform, but that was one of our specific examples where we've seen a lot of successes from it. But I see what you're saying, and essentially going on forwards, we will try to expand to more policies, but we have done that so far.
Also, Proposition 13 is about education, and education is like, because since all of these people were students and they would all agree that we would need more like money into education, and that's why like Proposition 13 was like a little basis that we like a little like a minor concept, a minor case that we focused on, because it was not unique to like one little population that we were trying to reach out, but it was for the whole target market. So if in the future, when we have like different policies that are not towards like education, that is like really that is very like normal for like all the students, then we would give like all the views of like everything else, so that we could also let them make their own decisions instead of focusing on whatever we are telling them to focus on.
Thank you. Yeah, excellent answers. Thank you.
Yeah, and like just adding on more towards that, we believe that even though we do focus on specific policies, it's kind of like a domino effect where it leads to a bigger issue and a bigger impact. So for example, Proposition 13 reform, even though we're targeting large corporations, essentially it's just broadening our education system. For example, giving more classes, giving more funding towards each different city for their Board of Education. For example, having more supplies, having more classrooms, especially right now within Fremont, we're going through a lot of budget cuts within our education. For example, we just recently went over a $14 million budget cut, and that's essentially being more detrimental and harmful towards our education because, for example, personally, I've had a lot of AP classes, a lot of different classes being cut off because we don't have enough funding to support for them. So even though we do focus on these small policies, we do believe like these small policies essentially lead to a broader impact that can be really beneficial for our education system in general.
Yeah, so really quickly, so you do, when you present these various issues, it's, I guess the question is, do you do it in such a way that you present both sides of the issue, because I mean, certainly Prop 13, there's certainly a lot of issues. I mean, a lot of pros to say, hey, we've got to add more funds to education, but there's also a cost to it, and it's important to present both sides, right?
Actually, that's interesting because, like, for example, in our youth voter rally, I met up with one of the school and communities first managers. I think he's a manager for schools and communities first, and he was also presenting both sides of Proposition 13 reform that even I didn't know personally. He was like, oh, it will still affect small businesses, it will still do this, like, even though like the benefits are better, you still have to see both sides, which kind of opened my eyes. So for example, if we have more events like that where we have like different local politicians expanding on both issues, I think it will be really beneficial.
Okay. Good answer, ladies.